Please reverse that. Okay. So, first thing, I'm going to apologize in that I am not reading from a paper. I have found that I absolutely cannot follow my own thoughts when trying to read from a paper, so I'm going to do this freestyle. I hope that's all right with everybody, that I won't be pressing my nose into a piece of paper. The other thing, just a little outline of what we're going to do today. First, I'm going to have a little note for our sponsors. Then I'll speak to you about what this manuscript is itself. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the life and work of Fiore de Liberi, who this guy is. I'll talk to you about this manuscript itself and what makes it so unique. And finally, I'll talk about the ongoing influence of this genre, which I expect that really nobody has very much knowledge of the textbook genre. So I'll try to tie that into the greater historical picture. And Colin will, I hope, let me know if I start going over time. So just a bit of a word for my sponsors. I suppose that next I'll be advertising the Donner Kebab place. But I'm appearing for you here thanks to some very, very generous grants. I'm an adjunct professor. We are losing an entire generation of scholarship in the United States in that we do not get travel funds, that my research and all of that really does me no good professionally, and because of the job situation, I'm unlikely to be getting a job where that does me any good. So I actually crowdsourced my appearance here. So, and this is also why I'm taping what I'm doing, so that it can be shared with the wider public. So thank you to everybody, and this is of course also of interest to a very large community of people who are interested in these historical sources. Mostly fencers, hobbyists, people who are amateur historians. And since this is of interest to a much wider group of people than the people in this room, this is why we're taping this. So, normally, we think of Translatio as movement, right? Movement from a sacred language to a vernacular language. I took Caro's Aeneid as an example, from Greek to Latin, movement from one place to another, Ficino translating Plato, or the Corpus Hermetica, or even the dissemination of esotericism, such as emblem books. But my big argument for manuscript for this manuscript, for 11269, is this actually goes against all those axes. That what we have here is movement from a vernacular, a rather rough vernacular, to Latin, to a very literary Latin. What's more, it's taking what is a physical art, and it is a practical art, and it's making it something literary. And furthermore, it's, by doing this, it's taking something that actually Fiore's original purpose in writing was to make what he was doing clearer, and here it's being obfuscated by a very literary Latin that not a lot of people would have been able to read. What is this manuscript? I'm just going to grab my bottle of water so I don't get too dry. Well, this manuscript is 44 parchment folios as it survives. It's not very big. It's 18.8 centimeters by 12.5 centimeters. It was rebound in the 17th century. There is signs of water damage on the first page, on the Segno page. That I'll talk to you more about that page in a little bit. Most likely composed around 1420, certainly after 1410. Before probably 1425 to tell from the style of the costumes therein. Requires about 10 pages, 2 guard pages. It was a property. It was acquired probably in Italy by Louis Florius, the Marquis of Mondschein, who was of course Louis XIV's minister and also a great collector of books. His collection form was one of the bases for the Bibliothèque Nationale. Each page is split into 2 registers, and each shows a fighting technique, a combat technique, both on top and on the bottom, accompanied by a Latin verse. And this is everything from combat on horseback to fighting against self-defense against someone trying to stab with a dagger. And if you've seen the other 3 manuscripts of The Flower of Battle, it's instantly recognizable. These are just some sample pages, reproduced rather small, just to show you what we're talking about. That's the first page, the so-called signal.
Excuse me, as you're speaking freely, would you mind if we douse the lights and we could see better what you're talking about?
Absolutely no problem, since I know what I'm talking about. You also better?
That's much better.
Yeah, cool. I know what it looks like. You don't know what it looks like. so so you can see here, and I'm going to reproduce some of these in larger scale, of course. So just an idea of what you get when you look at the manuscript, just to give you a visual idea of the manuscript I'm talking about. Who was this guy? Who is Florius de Liberi? I'm sorry, it's a bit washed out, it's a bit digitized. That's from the Getty version. But just to tell you who he was, in very brief, he was a professional mercenary, a professional soldier, I should say, born from internal evidence in the manuscripts around 1350, fought in the Friulian Civil War when, like many of the other city-states at the time, they kicked out their bishop. Friuli at that time was really part of the empire. Later in life, he became very sought after to train men for combat in the barriers. These were earnest fights, though not always deadly. In fact, they weren't really very often deadly. But they became very much a statement of class and prowess. If you're a member of the military class, which was beginning to come under some pressure there, one way you demonstrate that you're a member of this class is that you fight other members of your class within the barriers. One of the people he trained was Galeazzo di Mantova, who was married into the Visconti family. A lot of the people who he trained were associated with the Visconti, and Galeazzo beat actually twice Boucicaut, Jean de Maistre, who is the Marshal of France. So he was probably very well known in his own age, in his own time. And the reason why he's associated with D'Este, who he's most associated with actually, is that the Getty manuscript is dedicated to, which is considered the finest today, is dedicated to Niccolo III d'Este. And he says that he composed it actually in February of 1409, would be 1410 by our calendar. And the Flower Battle survives in 4 manuscripts. 3 that were known before I found the one in Paris, and the Paris one. There's also 2 lost manuscripts that we can tell from 16th century Estense library catalogs, because these were in the Estense library. The first one is the one at the Getty, 47 folios, the most complete, the most interesting artistically to us, at least, because it's drawn in sort of a freehand sketchy style, though still gilded, still very much a production. The Morgan, which is less complete, it's in the Morgan Library. The Pisani Dossi, which was published in 1903, I believe, by Navati, but that is in a private collection. No one has seen it since Navati has published it. And of course, the posthumous one in the Bibliothèque Nationale. This is clearly a posthumous translation of the earlier work. So it was done, within some time of Fiore's death. Just moving on, right? The Getty is the most in depth. I usually use this figure, which I'm sorry hasn't reproduced very well, to represent Fiore, just when I'm talking about him biographically. And most of what we know about him is given, what he tells us himself in the biography he gives us in the prologues of 2 of the manuscripts, the Getty and the Pisani Dossi, and including, very notably, he knew how to read, write, and draw, which means he's telling us that he's an educated person. I'll get to the importance of that in a moment. And other information around him was found by Novati, by Zannuto, who published a rather fanciful book on 1907 on festivals in his time and place, and also Maximo Malpiero, who published an Italian edition of the Getty in 2006. So the Getty manuscript, as I said, these manuscripts were probably preserved in the Getty, in the Estense Library, and the Getty manuscript is dedicated to Niccolo III. It's my belief either Fiore is trying to impress him as a patron, or perhaps these were diplomatic presents by the Visconti, because there's no record that anyone has found of Niccolo actually having paid any money to Fiore. But, do I have time?
No, that's fine. I'm just trying to read.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And we have to understand these books as part of the D'Este court milieu. Humanist consumption is part of their cultural style just as much as martial display is. That you have guys like Giovanni di Michele Savonarola in the court, you have Guarino Veronese there, and of course they found what's going to become the D'Este Library. They're going to become great collectors of books. Fiore explains, he plays this, he explains the relationship of fencing to literature. He says, to be a good fencer, you need books. But nobody, of course, except Galeazzo de Mantova had books. But you need books. But, you know, this is patently ridiculous. You don't need books to learn how to fight. In fact, to write a fencing book is rather complicated, because you need to know a lot besides fencing. You need to be literate. You need to be able to construct a book, that is, to organize your thoughts into a book, and to actually physically construct the book, or have someone to do it for you. You need to know not just the physical art you're teaching, fencing, whatever else it is, but also how to teach it. You need to be able to set things forth one after another, and you need to have an audience for this. And of course, the big question is who is the audience for this book? I'm going to leave that hanging for a bit. There are particular questions, though, of problems writing a fencing book, because fencing is not something static. It's not something that's just a static. It's not a pose. It's something that takes place in time, right? It's something that it develops as a dialectic between two or more people. So you need to be able to show this. You need to have a technical vocabulary so that you can say exactly what's going on. You need to be able to say what this technique is. You need to have the organizing principles by which you're going to teach this. And then you need to take this thing that you do in real life, right? Teaching somebody fencing, teaching anyone a physical art, something you do in real life, then you need to be able to put that into a static two-dimensional source. Which is possibly why we have even though we do have German fencing books of various subtypes, we don't have any Italian fencing books really contemporary of Fiore. And as you'll see, Fiore has got a very, very interesting scheme. And what we really have to do is expand our idea here of what a text is if we're going to look at what the flower of battle is. It's not just a text, but it's an entire system for explaining movement. And he uses quite a number of symbols to do this. Amongst these symbols, you have, I'm just going to skip sides right here so that I'm not standing in front of these. He shows you what happens first. This is a wrestling technique. You've got a guy at the crown. The guy at the crown shows you the first thing you do. You throw the guy's arms off. And then there's a guy who shows you a follow.
Some of you may want to get up closer and see. Can you all see back there? This is a nice
small... I tried to make them big. Yeah. That shows you a follow-up technique by the guy with the gilt garter. So first he does this, then he does this. Then the other guy can do a counter technique, and he's depicted with a crown and a garter.
Now, why do you call this fencing when it's all hand-to-hand?
Because exactly. Because it's eventually going to become strictly fencing literature. It is sort of a misnomer to call this fencing, but remember then it was the art of defense, and it incorporated everything from every sort of hand-to-hand combat, from horseback, from jousting all the way to wrestling.
So this is you're stuck somewhere without your dagger or your sword, and how are you going to defend yourself?
This is you're at a peace conference and a guy tries to stab you, right. Which happened. There's actually an incident where this happened. So the thing is, so this is sort of the visual pedagogy. There's also captions, and only the Getty really has long text with it. Everything else has these sort of very, very rough vernacular couplets. I'll show you some of that. It's also very hypertextual because things refer back to each other. You go back and forth in the document to understand what he's talking about. And it's because of this that you can really have the techniques in any order. The Getty and the Pisani Dossi begin with wrestling first. The other two begin with horseback first, but it doesn't matter. But they all go in the same order. It either goes from shortest distance, which is wrestling, to horseback, or horseback down to wrestling. So it's complete internally referential hypertext, combines image and text, you can read it in any order, and so we can see this as a translatio from the physical realm to literary. And it also incorporates contemporary ideas of education. Just as you learn to write by copying Latin letters, you're learning here to fight and the German for this genre is Fechtbuch, which can mean either fencing or fighting, right? But but you learn to fight by copying these patterns, just as you learn to write by copying letters, copying patterns, or you learn to draw by copying your master's work. Just to show you what is contained in this, very briefly, not of terrific importance to philologists, but interesting if you're interested in the study of historical martial arts. First recto is blank, the first verso is the signo. It's a mnemonic sign for all the qualities you need to become a good fighter. And we start with lances on horseback, and we start closing our distance. Swords on horseback, wrestling on horseback. What to do if you're on foot and someone attacks you on horseback. Spear on foot. Techniques for defeating a guy with a spear with 2 sticks, which we find in all of them. This is a sort of quintessential Fioreism. Then we get the poleaxe, the knightly pole weapon. Then we get sword in one hand, and then we get more sword and dagger. And this is where the choirs start to get a bit disordered, probably when it was rebound in the 17th century. We get dagger, which is how to defend yourself against someone trying to stab you. And then we find more sword in 2 hands, and this is probably disordered, right? We can see that's where it's where choir ends. We go from dagger, then we get to wrestling, then back in dagger, some of which are the techniques for use in armor. And then finally, on the last page, we get this epigraph telling us that Fiore, in fact, is quamna, no more. He is an ex-fencing master. He has joined the choir invisible. He's pining for the fjords, if there are fjords in Friuli. The difference now between the other manuscripts and this one, and here you see a nice big picture, right, is that the trash talk, and this is Richard Grodowski, a fencing master I know, he describes essentially what the poetry is of the other versions as trash talk has been translated into metrical Latin, sophisticated Latin verse. The only other example of Latin in any of the Fiore work is in the introduction to the Pisani Dosi. Here is just an example. Here is just one page. I chose this because these techniques are only found in the Pisani Dosi, and the techniques that he shows are found in the other manuscripts. But again, you can kind of pick and choose which one you want to put into your manuscript. In this case, we for simplicity's sake, I just took a page where the 2 techniques are only found also in the Pisani Dosi manuscript. and you can see this is pretty sophisticated Latin. Tego te aut feriam petenta cuspide postec dedicans studente animo facimus ad unguem. I uncover you so that I can strike, thrusting forward is my point. After this, with my spirit gritting its teeth for revenge, we will finish the work to perfection. Arbitror amenibus insis tibi carpere lentis calidor manus hoc rapu tubi caluter illi. I see you hold your sword with an easy hand. A clever hand will seize it from you like this, right? This is, it's good quality poetry. It's not exactly literary matters, but they've ennobled this. This is the first one as it's given the Pisani Dosi. It's in Friulian dialect, right? In this way I uncover you the thrust to avenge myself of every injury and harm. Per tal modo te discruo per ferite de punta, per vendigarmi de ti de omne in curia e onta. And then on the bottom, per lo modo che io pressa la tua spada toste delle mani te la avero cavato. In this way I grip your sword quickly from your hand, it will have fallen, basically. Not really high literary production there. It's just saying, and the others get worse. It's basically, and now I beat you into the ground and step on your face and hurt you a lot. Right? We're not talking here about high material. Right? What's more interesting is the system and the way it's put together. Right? And the fact that they're trying to show fighting in a manuscript. So this isn't really a translation. It's a transformation. Right? What's really important is that this thing that Fiore made has been translated into Latin. Right? This whole system, this whole textual system, has been translated into Latin. And it's not even a one-for-one copying, because, for instance, this in the other manuscripts, this is the bastard cross position. Now it's the leopard position. Another thing, these guys, they're showing follow-up techniques. They shouldn't have crowns. There's no reason for them to have crowns in the system. Well, they have crowns. The transformation of the art is part of this. Here's that Signo page. Let's compare. Which one was this? I think this is the Morgan segno. So this gives us all the attributes we need to be a good fighter. We've got an elephant with a tower for balance. We've got that's a tiger, believe it or not, with an arrow for speed. We've got a lion with a heart for audacia. And then we've got the links, a pair of dividers. Talk about measuring time, as you were. Well, dividers. We often find dividers for measuring time in a relative Aristotelian way in fencing master portraits all the way through like the 17th century and I think into the 18th. And we've got little verses explaining things a little bit more. Comparatively, we're a lot plainer in the Morgan version, which is, however, the closest one-to-one in terms of the style of the segno page. Here, just as another example, this is the 4 things you need to remember. This is very much medieval ideas of knowledge. Here are the 4 things that you need to know when defending yourself against the guy who's trying to stab you to death with a dagger. First thing, take his dagger away. He's holding a dagger. Second, there's no arms there, but he should be holding a pair of arms. Second thing, break his arms, as we say in Brooklyn. Third thing, he's holding a key. Lock him up, right? Put him in a hold, lock him. And then throw him down on the ground beneath you, right? Then throw him down on the ground beneath you. This is the Getty version, right? Very nice art, very nice kind of freehand, nice use of shading, very lovely. They probably would have liked this a lot better. They thought this was higher class art because this is clearly like it's drawn from a pattern book. Let me just get that caption away. And you've got your little, basically the same poetry on these banners as you have here in the Getty version. You notice also, in terms of symbology, that our masters are getting progressively older as they do this, showing the ongoing of time, right? First do this, then do this. Showing sort of the ages of man as a metaphor. So this is very rich symbology, very nifty. Notice also that they add ground in the Paris manuscript, shades of Masaccio perhaps. Not considered by today's standards great art, but certainly by their standards, maybe they would have thought this being more formalized, this together with the Latin, right, this would be better art in the 15th century. Other examples, the use of armor in this is completely rhetorical. In the other manuscripts, they show armor when you're showing fighting in armor, right, when you're showing techniques for fighting in armor. Here, the guy showing Fiori's technique, right, the guy who wins, is always wearing armor. Even if it's an unarmored play, and the other guy isn't wearing armor. So the armor is solely a rhetorical trick. Another example of how it changes. So these sorts of details mark the art as, this isn't illustration, the Getty is moving toward, is more illustrative. This is ideographical art.
I want to stop you, I'll tell you why.
Am I
The
running?
material is so interesting, and I suspect that nobody here knows it. And I suspect a lot of you have questions about it.
Do I have, am I out of time?
You have a little more time, but I just want to prepare you that there'll be a lot of questions.
Can I skip to my conclusions?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I already went over the slide, I mentioned this stuff. The other, because I just have a couple more slides to show you this transformation.
By all means.
The other thing, this is the window post, posta de fenestras, the window position. It's clearly marked as such in the script, but people have said this is a mistake. No, it's not a mistake. They purposely, you see here, he's holding the sword in front of his face. Here, they purposely drawn a hole in the sword so that you can still see the bella figura, the pretty face. So just another example there. One of the other things I wanted to mention, remember I mentioned the footman against horseman? Well, in none of the other manuscripts is this mentioned, but they transform it clearly to the D'Este Milieu, because the matter of France and the Charlemagne epic, and Boiardo, I believe, was in the D'Este court. It was part of that official D'Este court propaganda. So they add Roland and Pulicanus to this. So even if Roland and Pulicanus were seeking me out with a sharp ashen spear, I, a footman, would lie in wait, and then that would mess them up like this. So they add that bit of D'Este court propaganda to this. Another thing they do, this is the first mention of the idea of Aristotelian measurement of time, which is a subject way too complicated for me to get into here, but it's the first mention of the Aristotelian conception of time in an Italian fencing treatise. If you're interested in that, I just published an article on it in the Journal of the Northern Renaissance. It's free, it's online, you don't even have to go to the JSTOR. Just Google Mondschein, Journal of Northern Renaissance, you'll find it. So ideas of science. All of these things are ways in which the much rougher versions have been changed. Right? So distinguished by the use of literary, though not humanist, Latin, because they're using vocabulary that is not Ciceronian, things like, especially for military equipment. There's no classical Latin word for stirrup. This practical art is made courtly, even literary. This is a fixing, an ennoblement of Fiore's work. It's a sort of reverse translatio. And it's, of course, also an additional step in this taking of a physical art and moving it to a book. It's an expensive, prestigious book that speaks of the place of arms in the 15th century humanistic court milieu. And it also incorporates ideas of science, courtly literature, etc., etc., etc. One thing, though, I will note is that, this is the last slide, is that Florius, right, Fiore, is still given as the author, despite the many changes, which I think also brings up the idea of what exactly is authorship in a late medieval context. Because this is clearly his thing, his system, his book, right, his hypertext work, transported into another milieu. And then I could talk, you know what, I'm not even going to go into this slide. Take my word for it. There is a vast literature of fencing literature after this. I have written a great deal on it. If you're interested in that, talk to me afterwards, or just read one of my books.
No, I think you're perfectly timed, and that's exactly the slide I hope to see, because this material is provocative and it's novel, and so anyway, I guess we should have lights, so we can see who's asking what.
And keep taking questions, by the way.
I have millions of questions, but I'll shut up as I'm the chair. But I'm sure there are lots of people who do have questions, so please just fire away about this particular paper and any other papers. Perhaps some of the speakers would like to sit in the front. But this material is, I must admit, totally new to me. So why don't we start with this paper, if there are questions about it? Yes.
It's less a question than more a suggestion. If you go back to the senior page, you mentioned the elephant briefly, and you said that it would relate to balance, so a quality a fighter would have to have in order to be a good fighter. I would suggest that because, it's not just an elephant, but a battle elephant, that it alludes to historic battles, because the battle elephant is connected either with Alexander the Great or Eleazar, which would then, offer more complex kind of background for particular virtues a fighter or swordsman would have to have.
Well, I would be willing to, it's a battle elephant, yes. There's one way to draw, there's obviously many ways to draw an elephant in the Middle Ages. And I think that battle elephant was sort of stereotypical. It explicitly says what that elephant is for in the captions. Surely, yes, they were evoking some sorts of ideas of Alexander the Great. And also, to really understand it, you have to, look in Pliny, look in any bestiaries. The symbology in the Segno is very, very rich and complex. Certainly, the idea of it being related somehow to Alexander has occurred to me, but I can't really think of any way to do that would be supported by the text. I'm more willing to say that this is basically that they're talking about having a good stance.
Well, the first thing would be looking at the image, and then you would have to ask, why would you draw an elephant with a tower on its back? So obviously it's not just about the elephant, because if you have physiologists, as bestiaries, as you already mentioned, then you can just, leave that out. The fact is that they put it in, so I would kind of, that would mean there is a connection, and that would also lead to, to the idea that maybe the other animals that were depicted not only kind of refer to balance and stuff like that, which might be very much the case, but, kind of open broader complexes that also relate to qualities of a fighter.
I think you're right, because there was a lynx at the top.
Yeah.
And in Italy, the Lincei were like the Accademia dei Lincei. They were believed to see in the dark.
Right, because they're known for their eyesight, right? And it says, "I'm the lynx who sees everything with their eyes."
Yeah, exactly.
If you want my opinion about the elephant, it's what that tower is there is that when you're fighting or fencing, whatever, your lower body is your support, and your upper body does the hitting and hurting, but your lower body needs to be stable. So the tower is the fighting platform. On top, the elephant is the legs, right? The tower is the rest of the body. That's what I think it is. That's why I think they have that in there. People have read a lot into that. There have been papers on this. But he's pretty explicit about what they're there. I mean, he says, "I am the lynx who sees everything with the eyes. I am the tiger. I run faster than lightning." I mean, he's really not that subtle. Anyway, anyone have other questions about this or any of the other papers?
I actually had a question for Professor Cohen.
Cool.
That's okay. I'm sorry to.
Yes.
All right, it's not the Ken Mondschein show.
I really enjoyed your paper. Thank you very much, all of the papers. But my question was about images of Kairos and how many you've seen in which Kairos is actually being seen.
Are you speaking to me?
Yes.
I have a problem with my hearing.
Oh,
Sorry.
Why don't you come over here where I am?
Let's see if this is working. I'm not sure.
Why don't you come right here where I am?